Vision Kondorem, Sanajwan Zibe, Bodewad Miandao, Duwajek and Diane. I just introduced myself. I said, my name is Cusi Ballew. I'm Bear Clan, and Sanajwan Zibe is the St. Joseph River over by South Bend, southern Michigan area. Now called St. Joe, we call it Sanajwan, and that's where the Pokagon band Potawatomi is from. Nowadays we get called Pokagon band because Leopold Pokagon was probably the most influential figure in our history, in terms of his relations to treaties and the U.S. government. But I always like to say Sanajwan Zibe Bodewadmi because it talks about who we are and where we're from rather than just our relation to one person. Relation to one, we got designated Pokagon band Potawatomi, but really our identity is in where we're from rather than our relation to one person. So I work for the Pokagon band Potawatomi in the culture department. My title is the Cultural Sustainability Lead. Mostly what I do is workshops, workshops, carving, plant walks, some gardening and harvesting, tanning, hides like leather. And so today I'm going to talk about how culture interacts with sustainability. Thank you to the museum for inviting me here today. I don't always consider myself as someone who should be up in front of people talking. In our culture, I'm probably too young for this honor. But that's how it is. That's how it is. So we have a tribal historian. His name is Cecil. If you came here looking for history, I'm not really your guy. I know history and I understand a lot of our history, but I don't talk a lot about history. I talk more about culture. And so for us, culture is a roadmap, right? Our cultural ethics, morals, all of those things are a roadmap that could guide us 5,000 years ago as well as they can guide us today. And so I don't think a lot in terms of history. So I just did the museum tour and I did the steamboat. And so in the steamboat, they're talking about a time from about 1870 to 1920, and then a little bit more modern times. And I always try to think, that's history is about a point in time and what things were like at a point in time. 5,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Anishinaabe, which is the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Odawa, were over on the East Coast, and we migrated here. So there were other peoples here at that time. But now we're in 2025. Is anybody familiar with the term the Anthropocene or the Anthropocene, depending on how you want to say it? So what they say is that we've entered a new epoch, right? The Anthropocene, which means that human beings now more than ever are the most defining characteristic of what is happening on Earth. At times it has been the Ice Age, the dinosaurs, right? They had their time on Earth. Now human beings are the drivers of what is happening on Earth more than anything else, and that concerns me. So when I go back to thinking of culture, so part of what I don't know if this is controversial in this room or not, but I think a lot about climate change, and I think an environmental journalist and Tahltan woman from northern Canada named Candace Collison, and she says, we don't have an environmental problem. We have a social problem. To me, what that comes down to is culture, right? And so, as Indigenous people the world around, we still have these cultural roadmaps. It's difficult to live by them these days because we live in a colonized world. The Indigenous mindset is based on having access to large areas of land and creating abundance in that land. The colonial mindset is, most people I know don't have any land. And so we live in an economy based on shortage, on short supply, whereas an Indigenous economy is based on abundance. So to be Indigenous is to be rooted in a place, to be part of that place, as well as that place being part of you, like I said about Sanajwan Zibat. An Indigenous way of seeing the world is all about relationship. As human beings, we are the last ones in creation to come here. In some of our creation stories, the Creator made us almost as an art project, and put us down and said, wow, look at them. And everybody said, wow, look at them. And then it quickly became apparent that unlike the plants, we can't make our own food or draw water from the earth. And unlike the animals, we don't have fur, we don't have sharp claws, we don't have sharp teeth. We're pretty, we're without help, we're pretty helpless in this world. And so the Creator and the animals, in seeing this, realized that we weren't going to make it very long without help. And various plant relatives and animal relatives offered of themselves so that we could live. We don't eat raw meat, right? So we need wood to cook with. We can't sleep outside without a blanket, so we need furs or we need wool, or now we're still reliant on all these things, even though probably nobody in this room sleeps under a fur, right? All of us our houses are built of wood and stone, and even when we're wearing synthetics, we're talking about plant material from millions of years ago, right? So even when we're burning fossil fuels or wearing polyester, right? We are reliant on the plants and the animals who have decided in that old agreement to shelter us and take care of it. Not that I think that oil and gas is the most responsible use of that, but so as Potawatomis, we don't think of ourselves as being the apex of creation. More like I said, like an art project, that needs a lot of help to get along. And the plants and animals, we don't think of them as resources per se. Like you'll hear a lot of saying like the bear people, right? Or like we think of them as other beings, and they have their own stories, they have their own myths, they have their own culture, their own ways, and a lot of our stories, they can talk. Not a lot of people listen anymore, and so in that mindset, we were given tobacco, and our word for tobacco to this day is sema, but sema doesn't mean tobacco like the tobacco that you grow and smoke. Sema literally means an animate gift that is offered. And so before we cultivated what we now know as tobacco, we had the word Sema, and we used other plants. And you know, in times of need, I mean, you know, so, there's one of my favorite movies. He offers a Hershey bar. You know, the idea is to give what you have, to be thankful. But Sema was something that was given to us so that we can speak directly to the spirits. So when we lay down our Sema, that gives us a channel through which to speak and be thankful. And in that, right, I also, in being not a strictly historical person, I always want to make sure that, you know, when I describe that, it sounds really nice. People go, oh yeah, it sounds, you know, like. But I'm of the belief that we, as Indigenous people worldwide, had a pretty good culture that lived in rhythm with the world, but I don't think that we started out that way, because we have all these stories. We have all these stories, and the fact is that as human beings, we are jealous, we get angry, we get happy, we get, you know, overconfident, we get, you know, all the things in human beings. Those are all real. They were real for Indigenous people, they were real for traditional cultures, real for, you know, and so we have stories of not respecting the other beings in creation. We have stories of all the fish going away and us not being able to catch fish because we weren't respecting the relationship that we had with the fish. We have stories with the deer people, it was the same thing. And then there was all this work, all this ceremony, all this apology necessary to bring back those animals. And those stories, to me, speak of, and the reason that we tell them is to remind ourselves that when we get out of sync with the world around us, it will all come back. I think everybody here is familiar with at least one, if not more, quotes. You know, I think I don't have any direct quotes in my head, but I'm sure all of you are familiar with quotes from like during the treaty era where Indigenous leaders would tell them, you know, you can't eat money, you know, and you know, one day this will come back and the grass won't grow and the waters will be polluted. And you know, we're at that time now. I mean, this is a beautiful lake, but you know, you can't drink the water. We got lakes and rivers that you can't even swim in anymore. You know, to an Indigenous mindset, that is the logical conclusion of falling out of sync with the rhythms of creation. Right. So creation isn't something that happened a long time ago. Creation is something that's happening today and will continue to happen tomorrow. We are living in creation. Every day we create. Every day we destroy. Every day we create. Every day we destroy. It's all a cycle, right? So creation is also not a historical thing. Sure, there may have been a first thing, right? And there's all the history that came, but then we're still part of it every day, creation. So I don't like to idealize the past of us or anyone else. We learned a lot of hard lessons over the generations, and to me, what that meant is that when the Europeans got here, they saw people who had existed for just as long as Europeans had, right? Europeans came onto Turtle Island and they thought, oh, we're seeing a primitive people, right? We're seeing a people who still live in the Stone Age. And because of that, you know, they used, they called it terra nullis. If anybody's familiar with the old terms of, help me out here, Dad. So terra nullis and manifest destiny. if anybody's familiar with the terms, it comes from the Pope, from way back then, and they would say that if there were no Christians, then there was no one had rightful ownership of the land, because only Christians could own land. That's how they decided that we were not civilized or sophisticated enough. But in my estimation of it, we had highly advanced technologies, but our technologies were social and cultural rather than, I mean, you know, the technologies that we had worked for us in a social and cultural context, whereas the technologies that the Europeans had, I don't think that they made their social structure any more equal, and I don't think that they made their rivers any cleaner, and I don't think that they made their people any less hungry. Whereas our technologies were, you know, my dad likes to talk about casinos. People are like, well, how come tribes get to have casinos? And it's originally, when they made the Religious Freedom Act, they knew what Muslims did, they knew what Hindus did, they knew what Christians did. And so they asked some Native people, they said, what do Native people do? And we said, well, you know, we hold ceremonies of the changing of the seasons.
Up until that time, when it was no longer against the law to be an Indian,
yeah.
After the Native American Religious Freedom Act of 1978,
yeah.
After that, we were only 2 sentences in their code book.
Yeah.
United States Code Book. We were in volume 25. There was only 2 sentences there. So they sat around people.
They said we could have long hair in prison and in the military.
They talked to me and him, and they said, tell us about Indians. They say, well, we've got long hair.
Yeah.
And so now we don't have to get our hair cut when we go to prison.
or the military. And you know, we have you know, there's so many peoples, but you know, we have sweat lodge, we have like various things. And
it took us 20 years to quit doing our ceremonies at night because we've been doing them at night ever since we lost the war.
Yeah.
Because they were outlawed. And so we were doing sweat lodge, we were doing council lodge, we were doing all these things at night. And it was 1988, it was 1998 when we went, hey, we don't have to do this at night anymore. We've been included in the religious freedom. We're legit. We're like legalizing marijuana.
All right. So, but gambling is in the religious freedom, because we used to gamble. Now, we didn't gamble the same way that gaming happens in casinos or back alleys or horse tracks now. You didn't go gambling to get rich. It was part of our social structure, because there's always someone who has more, right? Say you go out, you know, a small hunting party, and you get 6, 8, you know, a couple deer, a couple elk, whatever, right? You come back, you're rich, but you also have days of work ahead of you, right? I mean, you know, that processing that much food, that many hides, all of that stuff is really difficult. And there's someone else who went out and they didn't get enough to feed their family, right? Or there's someone else who's injured and they didn't get enough, they don't have enough to feed their family. And so charity over the long term doesn't make people feel good, right? Like nobody likes things just being handed to them. You know, people will put up with charity because they need something, but it doesn't make us closer as a community. So what we did was we would send our elders or disabled people, and say, look, we've got too much. You need to go out and have a good time with everybody until you lose 250 pounds of meat, you know, and 2 hides. And someone else went out to feed their family. And so if I sent my dad and he knew how much he had to lose, even if he was winning, he would just stay there until his luck ran out and he lost what he came to lose. And he would have a great time.
And if I had a broken leg and I went there, I would stay until I had enough to feed my family. So that was, along with long hair, is what they told them. We gamble. And we told them we gambled because we didn't know what to do with poor people. We couldn't figure out anything to do with poor people, so we didn't have any.
So
this is how we did it.
So to me, what I see is, like I said, social technologies, right? So that's a social technology that's brilliant, right? You know, doing away with charity and turning it into a community event where everybody kind of knows what's going on, but they're having a good time doing it. And so when the Europeans got here, they didn't think that we were as much of an advanced society as they were, despite the fact that they had poor people all over the place. They had children living on the streets with no food and no family. That didn't exist in our community, right? Because our advancements were different. They weren't about things. And so, and the way I see it is, you know, you can have two peoples going this way and they diverge, right? It doesn't mean that one stopped and one continued, right? So civilization views the world as, we started here, you know, as peoples who ate raw meat and you know, and were naked. And then we moved here to having you know, steamboats and cars and hotels and all of this stuff. But to me, it's divergence rather than outstripping on that timeline. So it's more of a circular diagram than a linear line. We stayed in place, and that's the reason that that's important to us, right? That's the reason that balance is important to us, is because and why it's important to us to be identified as people in a place, because that's what made us who we were. You know, we didn't say, oh, we've used up everything here, now we have to go conquer our neighbors. You know, we fought plenty, but we didn't conquer, colonize, take over, move on. So when the Europeans came here, what they saw was free people living in a thriving land of abundance. And they claimed that it was because we weren't using it properly, right? But as Indigenous peoples, we, for generations, tended the relationships that we had. And our wealth was in the soil. Our wealth was in the forests. Our wealth was in the prairies. Our wealth was in the marshes. Anyone here is familiar with Chicago and Chicago's history. You know, Dad was saying earlier, Chicago was one of the places we went to shop. And it was full of medicine. So right here, actually, the Kankakee River Basin. Is anybody familiar with the Kankakee River? Is anybody familiar with the history of the Kankakee River and the current state of the Kankakee River? The Kankakee River was over 2.5 million acres of wetland. It was a river that was over 225 miles long. The Kankakee River currently has very little wetland on it, and it's 90 miles long. That is 135 miles shorter than it was because it went like this. It went like this, and now it goes like this, right? Now it's a drainage. I've been places in the Kankakee before that I could jump across that are not as wide as this table, because it's all been diverted for drainage. But they called it the breadbasket of Chicago. You know, people would go there and they would kill 500 ducks in a day and bring it back to Chicago. There was wild rice, there was deer, there was elk, there was trout, there was all kinds of fishes. And they drained it. So now you're familiar with draining the swamp, right? So that comes from places like the Kankakee River, the Great Black Swamp up by Cleveland in northern Ohio. All these swamps that were around the Great Lakes made it impossible for someone to get from here to there in a matter of, a day, right? A place that you could practically see might take you 4 days to get through, right? Because you had to go around the swamps. The Kankakee River was, like I said, I can jump across it now in places. The Kankakee River was 20 miles from one end of the wetland to the river in the middle to the other end of the wetland. And they would say that we were not using it properly. So that was, the places like that were the wealth that indigenous peoples had stored up over thousands of years. And so the reason that the United States of America is the wealthiest nation in the world right now, the most powerful nation in the world right now, is one, because of geography. It's nice to be this far from Europe and Asia. But also, two, we are living on the stored wealth of thousands of years of indigenous relationship. I don't say stewardship, we were a member of a community as human beings. So thousands of years of relationship with the land and building the soil rather than depleting the soil. And so, but from a colonized mindset, that wealth should be, that wealth is being depleted. That wealth was built over thousands of years, and just in a matter of a few hundred years, that wealth is going away. Just last century, we had the Dust Bowl. So, a lot of times people talk about just sort of like, they didn't know about crop rotation and this, that, the other, and that's why the Dust Bowl happened. But I also want to point out, there are things, so as indigenous people, we didn't necessarily understand all the science behind everything that we did. Our belief is that every being, even those so small that we can't see them, has a purpose in the world. And so there's things that we didn't understand, but we didn't mess with them. But so part of the reason that the Dust Bowl happened, one thing people don't think about trees, but trees are the way that water is moved. Okay, so there's rivers, there's lakes, there's ponds, right? But when we think about the water cycle, what they did is they logged from the Atlantic all the way to the Mississippi. And past the Mississippi, the trees get much smaller. There's not giant forests up there. But when they did that, in a matter of 50 years, there were no more big trees, right? And water from the ocean would be conveyed through the trees transpiring. A tree this big can transpire 3,000 gallons a day into the air through its leaves. Without those trees, that water never made it to the middle of the country. And so it's these things, and so a colonized mindset versus an indigenous mindset. An indigenous mindset is about making short-term sacrifices for the long term, for the big picture, right? And a colonized mindset is about getting it now, right? So making long-term sacrifices. We've made long-term sacrifices for what we have right now. Because of our casinos, in terms of money and comfort, the Potawatomi have besides land, more fancy things than we have ever had, right? But we still don't have clean water that we can drink. We still don't have manomen. So manomen is what gets called wild rice. Everybody here eaten wild rice before? Pretty familiar? Manomen. So I don't like to call it wild rice because it's not really wild and it's definitely not really rice. Monomen just means the good seed or the good berry. And so that's what I'm going to say from here on out is monomen. So monomen grew everywhere around the Great Lakes, and there's two main types, and down further south here we have a smaller type. But it only required a few things. So gentle to no flow, 2 to 5 foot water depth, clear, not brackish water, and rich muck on the bottom, right? So those are the environmental factors, of an area that monomen needs. So, has anybody here ever seen monomen growing? But it used to be in many rivers here, in many streams, and almost every lake that had those conditions, which at some place they do, 2 to 5 foot depth is somewhere in the lake, whether it's on the edge or in the middle. Some lakes would, you'll still see lakes called Rice Lake, and they're 5 feet deep all the way across. Hey, when this lake fills in, talk to us. Maybe we'll kick all the boats out and come play monomen. When you got 5 feet left. And so it was monomen that brought the Anishinaabe to the Great Lakes. And before we were here, the Dakota were here, and they were monomen people. We got in a fight with them when we pushed them west. We came here as part of a prophecy that said that people would come from the ocean, and the prophecy wasn't sure. Was like there's two options. They might be friendly and they might not. Turned out not. And so the people who believe that they wouldn't be friendly, those are the people who are my ancestors who came here. So we had what we call monomen ogima. And so ogima means teacher, leader, helper, those various things. It's not direct English translation, but Monomen Ogima's job was to watch the rice all year. And everybody would go out and harvest. Everybody would help, toast the rice and dance the rice and winnow the rice and process the rice and dry the rice. All that stuff, all that work was everybody's work. But the Monomen Ogima was the one who would say, now the rice is ready. Because when the rice is underripe, you don't want it. You don't want the green rice, right? It's not going to cook right. It's not going to parch right. The hulls won't come off of it. And so every community and every lake had Monomen Ogima who would tell people when it was time. And then everybody would go out in their jimon, their canoes. And one person's in the front with like a 25-foot long pole, just pulling it up, pushing. And then there's a person in the back with 2 knockers, cedar sticks, about that long. And what you do is you pull the rice, and the rice will be taller than you sitting down in a canoe. And the person in the front standing up so they can also see just above the tops of the rice. And you'll pull it down, and then you'll push with your other knocker, and then you'll do the same on the other side. And you can see people doing this really quickly, right? And the thing about monomen is that muskrats, beavers, carp, catfish, birds of all types, especially the red-winged blackbirds, deer, everybody eats monomen. And if you don't eat monomen, you eat someone who eats monomen, right? So that time of year, that was the food. That was the primary food source that time of year, around September, August, September. And monomen's main problem is getting past everyone who eats monomen to plant seed. And that is where human beings come in. So in this process, and you're just, the person in the front's just going, and you're moving at about this pace, and the person in the back is just bringing it into the canoe. But it's messy, right? And the rice, and you're doing it gently because you want to leave the unripe rice. The ripe rice just needs to be gently knocked and it comes off. So you're doing that, but the rice is just popping off and a bunch of it's falling into the canoe, right? But that messiness, probably 25–30% of what you knock just bounces off the edges of the canoe and into the water. And while you're out there in your canoe, you're chasing off the geese, the ducks, the muskrats, the beavers, the carp, the catfish, the trout, everybody else who's eating Monoman. They're all making themselves scarce because you're out there pushing a pole and knocking around and, whatever. The rice has a chance to fall to the ground. And if you've ever watched it's really beautiful stuff, but it will work its way into your ear. You gotta cover your ears, you gotta cover your nose sometimes, If you put a piece of rice on the tip of your tongue and you're thirsty, the next thing you know, it'll be working its way down your throat. And it's really unpleasant. It's got like little barbs on it. And so that's what it does when it gets into the ground. It just pushes its way down in there and the fish can't get it. But if no people go out to harvest, and if they're not messy and quick about it, then the Monoman doesn't get replanted and it all gets eaten. And so the reason we don't see Monoman everywhere now is not just because we've dammed the rivers, which is part of it. It's not just because the water's not as clean as it used to be, that's part of it. It's because the Anishinaabe are not out there harvesting everywhere, and that's because so much lakefront property is privately owned, and we don't have access to it. And that happened a long, long time ago. But Monoman can and will come back if people plant it and harvest it, and that's how it works. That's something that I think is really important for folks to understand, because also the Europeans were like, look at that, because the Monoman Okima will tell everybody, okay, we're done. And there'll be a whole portion of the lake that no one's even gone out harvesting yet. And the purpose of that is that the geese, the ducks, the muskrats, the beavers, the deer, the carp, the catfish, the red-winged blackbirds, the trout, the thrushes, all of them still have to eat, right? We're not the only ones, we know we're not the only ones who rely on Monoman. So whether it's a good year or a bad year, we leave 50% of that Monoman out there, or whatever the Monoman Ogima says, we leave out there, we leave out there. Even if it was a poor year. So that's my example of those relationships that I was talking about, and how this place is built on relationships. This whole land. We weren't stewards, once again, we were members of a community simply doing our job as human beings. As human beings, we have a responsibility to have respect and act with care for the world that sustains us, not simply because it's the right thing to do, but it's a matter of long-term survival. I come back to that all the time because I think that that long-term survival is something we have to keep in mind as human beings, right? That we need to make decisions based on, like most people, most governments, most corporations don't have more than a 5-year plan, much less a 20-year plan. I'm talking about a 1,000-year plan. I'm talking about a 500-year plan. People have heard of 7 generations, right? So we often think of the 7 generations before us and the 7 generations after us. So it's those 7 generations before us that have been planning for us, and we're planning for those 7 generations after us. And I know 7 generations isn't 1,000 years, but it's long enough, it's at least 100 years, and it's long enough that we can talk about 1,000. If you're making things work 200 years in the future with what you're doing now, then 1,000 is doable. If you're making things worse in 50 years by what you're doing now than 1,000 years is unattainable. And so we return to where we started, the Anthropocene. If human beings are the dominant force shaping the state of the earth right now, what kind of humans do we need to be? What kind of society do we need to be? Can we take what we learn, both the good and the bad, and learn to live in a good way that fosters thriving for all of creation? And the answer to me, once again, lies in culture, right? Science is all right sometimes. I like science. I can get into science, and laws keep some people from doing some things. My dad was in here. I never stopped him. And by culture, I don't mean just like art, music, and literature. I mean culture in that indigenous sense. I mean, as Tyson Yunkaporta calls it, inviolable lore, right? So the stories that tell us how to live, and that we don't challenge them because they tell us how to live, and they've told us how to live for time immemorial. So culture is not just something we happen to be part of, but it teaches us how to live and guides us in times of difficult decision making. In America, if you can, then the idea is go ahead and do it. It's a colonized mindset. And people sometimes ask me what decolonization means. And, a lot of times, people will start with a land acknowledgement, they might invite somebody to speak, and I appreciate that. And acknowledging native people on the land isn't something that was done 15 years ago even. But ultimately, these are just the beginning. To me, decolonization is taking no for an answer, right? When the answer is no, it's holding ourselves to an ethic of not exploiting others to get our wants and needs met. My dad always says to me that when Europeans got here, we would have been driving cars around, and we were brilliant people. We would have had the technologies that Europeans had if we could figure out how to do that without exploiting all of our relatives, right? And we couldn't, so we didn't. So, there's an Anishinaabe writer named Leanne Batashwasoke Simpson, and she wrote in her book, Dancing on Our Turtle's Back, that a lot of people had come to her, as people sometimes come to me to talk about environmental sustainability. And she went to one of her elders, a fluent speaker, and she said, "What's our word for sustainability?" And he said, "I'll get back to you on that." And a while later, she asked him again, and he said, "Oh yeah, I thought about that. I didn't come up with anything. We don't have a word for that." And she's like, "What? Everybody always tells me, like our people, like they want to learn from us because we're like the, like we're models of environmental sustainability and all this." And he says, "Yeah, but it's the wrong way to think of it. It's so." And what he said is, we have no word for that concept because we're not concerned with sustainability. We're not concerned with the threshold of how little each part of creation can get by on, which is what it seemed to him the meaning of the word sustainability means. It's not thriving, right? It's not abundance, it's sustainability. What do we need to sustain, And so he said, we're not interested in that. We're not interested in keeping the earth on life support for as long as we can do it, As an Anishinaabe, we ask, how little can I get by on? How much can I take? What comforts can I have and still be in good relation? And how much must I leave for the rest of creation to thrive? Not just sustain, not just survive. So we as a people cannot be satisfied with an earth that will survive hanging on by the skin of her teeth. We have to be concerned with doing what we can to foster an earth that's thriving. So the words we have for this are Minobamatswin. The most simple way that it gets translated is the good life, or the good path, or the good way. But I've also heard it translated as continual rebirth, or generating continual life. So Minobamatswin is not as simple as living a colonized life. It's complex, not complicated, but complex. It's about complex relationships. Manopomazuan requires of us that we know the relationships involved in the choices and actions we take, and that we accept the responsibility to take choices and actions that lead us into right relationships.